Hello, and welcome to the first Prog Connection version of the Worst to Best series that is available on my channel. Here we are. I think this is going to be a very interesting one. The history behind this band is ridiculously rich. They've been around since 1963, if I remember reading the articles properly. They were labeled under a ridiculous amount of names until they finally landed on the Pink Floyd in 66, and then Pink Floyd finally in 67. It's a very interesting little band that we're talking about here, as big as they are, with some of the most iconic albums in history. I mean, in terms of just record sales alone and how iconic their Dark Side of the Moon album cover is, everyone basically knows this band. So it's hard to go 5 minutes without seeing something that's even a little bit related in the open world, where you can in stores especially. So we're talking about one of the most popular bands, Pink Floyd, and we're going to be talking about what albums we think are better than others in their entire discography, ranking their albums from worst to best, much similar to how we did it before, but we're doing it with two or more people. And in this case, it's Dad and I doing the first episode. We're doing Pink Floyd. Dad, why not you give a little bit of a rundown on your history with the band?
As we listened through the entire discography over the last couple of weeks, I would say that a lot of it I didn't really like that much. I really liked this band when I was younger. Now I would say that they're not one of my favorite prog bands, and I'm not even really sure that much of the discography is prog rock. It's a lot of psychedelic stuff and kind of noodling and nonsense here and there. And it's not a great discography. However, they do have a couple of extremely iconic albums that are fantastic and do hold up and are really good even to this day. So, it was interesting going back and listening to those albums. A lot of them are not as good as they're perceived to be, but again, some of them I wasn't even that familiar with, like Obscured by Clouds and stuff. Some of these older albums, I've never really listened to them that much, so I didn't really know them. So in a way, it was good to go back and listen to these things one more time and give them a serious listen, as if though they were a new album now, and just take them for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I did enjoy that aspect of it going back, but overall, the discography is not very strong, and I don't think they should be considered one of the great prog bands. They're more of a psychedelic noodling band that turned themselves into a sort of commercial juggernaut and sold lots of albums. But for the most part, it's not that fantastic, as we'll see as we go along. But as I say, I'll repeat, when they were really good, boy, were they good. Obviously for me, the person that stands out the most is Richard Wright. I think he's pretty much the heart and soul of Pink Floyd. He's really the person who's writing and sound really epitomizes, when they're at their best, what they really sound like. When they're at their best, without his keyboard playing, it just doesn't work. So his keyboard playing really does, as with most great prog bands, when they're at their best, it's the keyboard player that really carries the day, isn't it? And his writing as well, which had a lot of sort of a jazz inflection to it, and built up the mood of Pink Floyd. I think because I've had a chance to listen to it many years after having first heard many of these things, that my rankings will not be in sync with what many people would think are, the great Pink Floyd albums, but some of it will. I think some of it I somewhat agree with some of the, the things that end up on the Prog Archives 100 or whatever. Some of that I do agree with, so I can see why some of those albums are so good, and I will concur with that opinion, but I may have a few surprises up my sleeve.
Okay, so with that, I think we're going to start the list, and I think that it's only appropriate that we start with the album that we both agree was the worst. So why not we start with that? Number 15.
Yeah, my number 15 was the final cut. I did listen to it again today before we did this episode,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see where it sounds a lot like a continuation of The Wall. First few tracks sound like they could have been on The Wall.
Mm-hmm.
However, overall, the overall album to sort of steal an expression from Andy Edwards, who was kind of shite. Right? It's a really poor album. I mean, it's a lot of crap. It's like a Roger Waters solo album that, even as a solo album, is not a good album. It's just a lot of garbage. Really not a Pink Floyd album.
Mm.
And I guess the theme of the album is war is a really bad thing. Wow, how profound.
Yeah.
Anybody who thinks war is a good thing? Yeah, there's probably 5 people on planet Earth right now who probably think war is a very good thing. I don't know. Maybe there's 5. I don't know who they are. And I'm not going to name any names, but that's the thing. I won't get into that sort of political thing that Roger Waters seems to love to swim in the pool of political opinion and thinks that those make for good albums. But I don't think many people in the audience want to be preached to.
No.
Even as a follow-up to The Wall seemed to me to be a bit more of a personal story,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yes, it was sort of an autobiography of Roger Waters' upbringing and how he felt as a kid about his father dying in the war and all that stuff, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with a personal story. And I understand that there's some political overtones in that. All war comes out of politics, so we get that, but this album is just that war is bad, which pretty much anybody who put the album on, even if they didn't like one note that was played, would agree with. So he's not really saying anything profound, but the music is not that good, and so I would say that this is definitely of all the albums I listened to, and some of them were not that great, this one was definitely the worst.
Mm-hmm.
So it's without reservation, I say, the final cut is the worst Pink Floyd album ever. It's crap.
My number 15 was also the final cut. It does hold one of my favorite songs from Pink Floyd on this album, the Fletcher Memorial Home, which I think is a very good song despite the political undertones on the lyrics. I did think that for the most part the production is decent. Overall, I don't think that the amount of good material on here was worth an entire listen. Also, the music videos were very kind of political, and I didn't want to swim in those waters. So, overall, not my favorite, not very good, not my cup of tea anyway. And the only standout track for me was the Fletcher Memorial Home. So, why don't we move on to number 14?
So at number 14, I have More.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a hodgepodge of psychedelic noodling.
Yeah.
And there was bits of it where it sounded a little bit like Hendrix or The Who, that kind of sort of mod rock. I don't know what that is, but other than that, it was really a hodgepodge. It was all over the place. It doesn't really hang together very well as an album.
No.
And it sort of epitomizes the worst of, except for the final cut, it's the worst of the rest of Pink Floyd. It's not good, and I would not really want to hear this album again.
My thoughts on More are the same. It's my number 14 as well. It was released in 1969. It was originally it's a soundtrack album, so maybe it works well as a soundtrack, and you can definitely hear a little bit of qualities of what the future of Pink Floyd sounds like on here. You can hear a little bit of the space rock that still existed. However, I don't think that this worked as a standalone album. Maybe it would work as a soundtrack in the movie context, but I don't think it actually works well as a very good start to finish album that you go out and physically buy. Generally, I would say that this is only for collectors. I think that it's got just a little bit too much bluesy rock for me. It's as you mentioned, the Hendrix tones here and there. Yeah, the only standout track for me is "Green Is the Color," and I think we'll leave it at that. Then move on to number 13.
Number 13, I have Amagama. Pretty much the same criticism as for More. I don't think it's kind of a lot of psychedelic noodling, and I don't know. I don't get it. Doesn't really hang together as much of an album, but so I don't know. I don't get it. So
My number 13 is also Amagama. It was released in 1970. It is the album that was half live, half studio, which is a cool concept and was done by Genesis as well. I think Three Sides Live was a very similar concept. I do think that this has some good Richard Wright moments and some nice instrumental sections from Gilmour, but otherwise I think that this is mostly a miss album. A lot of the stuff that I found on here was just meandering avant-garde ambience that just didn't work for me. I do think that Sisyphus Part 2 and The Narrow Way Part 1 were very nice, but there were some really questionable songs on here. The extreme experimentalism on this album is unbelievable, and I'm not sure about the avant-garde nature of this. Maybe something that I wouldn't recommend this band to do generally, at least not like this. Not for me. That's about it. Let's move on to number 12.
at number 12, I had Obscured by Clouds. Again, I didn't get this album either. I guess it's sort of in the vein of metal, but it doesn't seem to hang together as well. So I don't know. That's another sort of poor attempt at an album without it lacks focus. It's here and there, it's all over the place. I don't know. I don't get it. It's not my cup of tea, that's for sure.
So my number 12 was The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which was released in 1967. This is where, for me, the albums become a little bit more enjoyable, at least on this list. That's what I'm talking about. I enjoy the psychedelic rock aspect of this album. Plus, they do have a lot of songs on here that would very much define the future of Pink Floyd. Songs like Astronomy to Mine and Interstellar Overdrive are both standout tracks for me, and the songs that I would say definitely defined where this band was going to go moving forward. So let's move on.
At 11, I have Atom Heart Mother. I think the orchestration on this album is nice, but other than that, it also lacks focus and doesn't really come together. It just kind of meanders here and there, and I do appreciate the effort at the orchestration, and I thought that was nice. It kind of reminds me of a little bit of later Alan Parsons albums, but not strong enough for an album, and they should have stuck to some kind of songwriting. So I don't know. It's just not that great.
My number 11 was A Saucer Full of Secrets, and this, just like the last one, which is the last album to feature Syd Barrett, and it definitely feels like it, but you have Gilmour on this record too. So it feels like the In-Between album very much. It just feels exactly like what you would get if you had a Gilmour and Syd Barrett era mixed together in one. And you can hear small echoes of metal here and there. Again, the extreme defining songs are here, and the beginning of elements of what made them great is here. But for me, it's still not better it's not the best listen overall. Sadly, also it has pretty poor production. That's a little bit sad, but the standout tracks that do stand out to me here are Remember a Day and Set Your Controls for the Heart of the Sun, which is obviously a ridiculous classic. So we're going to move on to number 10.
Up the top 10, right?
Yes, now we're entering the top 10. This is where albums really start getting good.
Well, I will follow up with your pick for pretty much the same reasons. A Saucer Full of Secrets, I had at number 10.
Yeah.
Again, for the classics, set the controls for the Heart of the Sun and all that stuff. And again, if it's a mix of Gilmour and Sid, it kind of does work a little bit on this album. And
Yes.
I do appreciate the kind of psychedelic genius of Sid Barrett era.
Yeah, me too.
And so it kind of works on this one.
Hmm.
And it does set up the sort of formula for going forward, with the space rock
Absolutely,
stuff.
yeah.
So yeah, Songs of Full Sacred.
My number 10 is Obscured by Clouds, which I do think it's the album that it's the album after metal, it's the soundtrack album, and it does have those similar veins like you mentioned. It makes sense that it sounds a little like metal considering it's directly afterwards, but I also don't know how much it works as a standalone album just like More. I do think that this album had a couple of nice songs, although generally speaking, I don't think that it works as, like I said, a sit down and listen album. Probably works much better in the movie context. I do think that the production for the time is decent. The instrumentation found on here is very classic of Pink Floyd, so there's no real criticism with the general music and how it's produced, but just the songwriting and the fact that I think that the soundtrack albums themselves myself don't work as album. We're gonna move on to number 9.
I went with A Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Mm.
Again, I do like some of the Sid Barrett era psychedelic take on things, the space rock thing, but again, yes, it's not that well produced.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound that great anymore. And it doesn't really tell you what's coming next in terms of the direction of Pink Floyd, because it's kind of the end of an era.
Yeah.
Even though it's the first album, Searching for the Secrets is kind of the end of the era, but still, it is that sort of classic Sid Barrett era album, and I like it for what it is.
Yeah.
But it's not great, but it's okay.
My number 9 is a Momentary Lapse of Reason, released in 1987. I thought that, for the most part, the first album without Roger Waters in it is very good. I don't think it succeeded in every aspect, though. The production was good. I do think it lacked in a little bit of songwriting. Generally speaking, it has some elements that you will find in the 70s Pink Floyd, but you're not getting that same tone and you're not getting that same songwriting quality that you had back in the 70s, at least not to the same degree and not of the same style entirely. It has echoes of that direction, but it's different. It's far more Gilmour and Wright directed instead of Gilmour and Wright contributions. It's good. It's just non-essential. The standout tracks for me were Learning to Fly, which is good.
Okay.
On the Turning Away, which is good. A New Machine, both part 1 and 2, and Sorrow, which is very classic when looking at the live context, all of these songs, except for A New Machine, which I don't believe was ever played live. But I think we're going to move on to number 8.
At number 8, I had Metal. I like this album a lot. I don't think it's a classic Pink Floyd album, but I like it a lot. It does have some classic bits on it, but it is a really good one and one that's easy to listen to, and it does hold together as an album well. I do like the acoustic bits, and I like, the long track as well, the echoes. It's nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I just don't like it as well as I like some other stuff, and I don't find it to be one of the classics, but obviously that probably won't be shared by a lot of listeners who are massive Pink Floyd fans.
Yeah.
But again, as I said at the beginning, I'm not really a massive Pink Floyd fan, but I do like this one, and I like other ones even more. So I don't know. That's where I landed at number 8 was Metal.
My number 8 is Atom Heart Mother. Oh man, does this feel like this was the album where they were preaching change and trying to move away from the space rock, psychedelic rock label, and it ended up just being a slightly more symphonic Pink Floyd album. It didn't have the same gravity as the upcoming albums, but the material found here was just starting to really resemble the stuff that you would find on upcoming albums that would later be known as some of the most iconic in the band's discography. Good. However, I think that the attempt to be different was forced here and there, specifically the openings of the epic and the closing section, the last third of the track, I would say, is very specifically my thoughts of the forced moments where it's just very forced symphonic. I'll listen to it again. The standout tracks for me are the big concept piece in Atom Heart Mother, minus the symphonic bits. If and Fat Old Son, very, very nice tracks. Very folky in that one too. Now we're going to move on to number 7.
So following up with my commentary on the final cut where Roger Waters went off on his own direction and kind of ruined the band, I guess you would say that David Gilmour rescued the band. And so my next pick was A Momentary Lapse of Reason, just for that idea that David Gilmour rescued Pink Floyd and brought them back into what was not a fantastic album, but a decent album, and one that was much more to my mind, much more in the Pink Floyd spirit, and less of it didn't involve the Roger Waters going off into the political landscape and all his nonsense. And I mean, I think it's a pretty solid album, and still has a very good mood of what Pink Floyd ought to sound like. And so I enjoyed. I mean, I listened to it again today. It's pretty enjoyable. I like it. So
number 7 for me is The Endless River, released in 2014. The last album ever recorded by this iconic band. It's also the last written compositions of Richard Wright. I really enjoy the mood of this album. The production is very well done, and I think that the single for Wright, specifically written for Wright, is very nicely written too. Very in the spirit of what Pink Floyd was doing. Very good. I recommend a full listen. The standout tracks were side 1, 2, and 3, and Louder Than Words. I think most of this album is very good. It's just not what you're going to normally expect. It's not, it's mostly instrumental, except for one song. So we'll move on to number 6.
My number 6 is The Division Bell. It's a great follow-up to A Momentary Lapse of Reason, and I just listened to it again today, and I really enjoyed it all the way through. So I think it's a really, really good, solid Pink Floyd album. And again, with David Gilmour and Richard Wright at the helm, showing a direction for Pink Floyd that was probably more true to what they were doing in the middle 70s, and carrying on that kind of style. I think it really, really exemplifies what they were good at.
Yeah.
And it's a more concise, song-oriented, concise Pink Floyd album. So I really enjoyed it. So I think that's a good pick.
My number 6 is the exact same. I'm going with The Division Bell from 1994. Division Bell is the step above A Momentary Lapse of Reason for me. Some really strong material here. I think that the Pulse DVD really gave me a little bit of a sentimental value because a lot of the Pulse DVD has Division Bell material, which you and I enjoy watching, and we like the Pulse DVD, very cool DVD, which made me love the sound of Pink Floyd anyway. Yeah, indeed. I think it does have a lot more stronger material than A Momentary Lapse. Also, I think that just them playing this live really it moved things along for this album, and just some of these songs just grew for me. So the standout tracks, Cluster 1, very good. What Do You Want From Me? Also great. Great Day for Freedom is nice. Take It Back is classic, I would say. Keep Talking, great. And the one of my favorite songs is on this album too, in High Hopes. I love that track. It's fantastic. I would say it's probably the best song written in the Gilmour Wright era, but it's just also a very just classy Pink Floyd song. Very well done, really well written. Number 5.
We're into the top 5.
Yeah, we are. This is
So we're
where
getting
albums become solid.
we're getting serious.
Oh yeah, this is the serious stuff. Let's see what you have.
I have The Endless River.
All right.
I do understand that some of this stuff was meant to be a Richard Wright solo album, and some of it may have been outtakes or leftovers from the Division Bell.
Mm-hmm.
So it does have the same sort of sonic quality as the Division Bell, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
However, as I said before, I do find that Richard Wright was sort of the unsung hero
Yeah.
in Pink Floyd. I find him to be sort of the heart and soul of Pink Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
His sound, his keyboard playing provides the mood for almost everything that they developed.
Yeah.
And by far, I think he's the best musician in the band.
Mm-hmm.
He's a real musician's musician. He's got a very jazz-oriented style.
Yeah.
And I think he knows what he's coming from. He knows what he's trying to convey. And I don't know. I know it could have been better had other people contributed a little bit more to it, and it had actually been a full-fledged album rather than a posthumous throw together of bits and pieces that were in the studio.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still find it very, very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of the greats. I hope that it's considered as one of their classics as years and years roll on and people go back and look at the catalog over. So for me, it's very easy to put that in the top 5. I should have maybe have even put it higher, but it's tough because there are other great albums. But for me, that's very easy to be in the top 5. Yeah. Again,
yeah.
As a keyboard player, Richard Wright is one of the greats. He's a classic, great progressive rock keyboard player.
Yeah.
And he should be remembered as such.
Yep.
And so that was easy. So yeah, Endless River at number 5.
Now, my number 5 is The Wall, released in 1979. I don't love everything found on here. However, the objectively iconic and good songs are here. The creativity of some of the ideas here is incredible. The ending the album with Isn't This Where, and then starting the album with We Came In is genius. I just think it's a little overblown. It's more of a rock opera in moments, which is not for me personally. And I don't know what to do with some of these interludes because, and transition songs too, because it's just, I don't know how to rank them. And I don't know if it's fair to put them in here because some of them are not my flavor. Some of them are too short to even be worth mentioning because it's more just for the concept. However, it's genuinely iconic and good. I recommend a full listen, but in my mind, it's not the most essential album they have. But it's up there. Standout tracks for me were both In the Flesh songs, The Thin Ice, Another Brick in the Wall Suite, Mother, Goodbye Blue Skies, which is beautiful, Young Lust, Hey You, Is There Anybody Out There, great, Comfortably Numb, iconic, The Show Must Go On, and Run Like Hell. Great album, not their most essential piece though. Dead number 4.
I'm just following up with you, I guess. My number 4 is The Wall.
Yeah.
I don't think it really works as an album. There are fantastic songs on this album.
Mm-hmm.
Comfortably Numb, Mother, Blue Sky.
Mm-hmm.
Even Brick in the Wall is great.
Yep.
But as an overall concept, it does not hang together that well.
Yeah.
And the tracks, like The Trial,
Yeah.
that try to make it into a rock opera, are really, if you listen to them on their own, they're not musically very good. They're just things that fit into the sort of play, I guess, the opera of it all, and they don't work as a song on their own at all. And I don't really appreciate those things. So I like the classic tracks that everybody else likes, but I don't think it really hangs together as a great Pink Floyd album.
No, I agree. I think that overall there are songs from Division Bell I'd probably even listen to over some of the material on The Wall. So on any given day, I might even put the Division Bell in my top 5, but I can 100% agree with that. And number 4, which is Wish You Were Here, released in 1975. Wish You Were Here is the perfect transition album from Dark Side of the Moon. The spacey elements you find in Metal and the previous album, Dark Side of the Moon, can be found here. However, the dominance of Wright and Gilmour is staggering and comparable to that of Animals, while the album is basically the exact opposite of the coming album. The structure is totally opposite of Animals. The epics starting off Wish You Were Here, and the short little tracks in the middle, and Animals being the short little tracks at the beginning and the long pieces in the middle. It's very interesting to see the contrast between those two albums. This one being a lot more light and beautiful airiness to it in terms of the songwriting. I do think that it's very well done, and I love this album a ton. I do think it suffers from a little bit of overplay, despite it being basically a masterpiece. The standout tracks are the entire Shine On You Crazy Diamond Suite, Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar. Fantastic album. Why not we move on to number 3?
In the theme of going back and forth, and considering that you've said it all, I will say Wish You Were Here as well. I will say Wish You Were Here is my number 3. Again, we listened to it. You and I listened a bit to it today. And, I mean, it's often thought of as a concept album, as a tribute to Sid, but other than the title track and the first track, not really, right? Like Welcome to the Machine and Have a Cigar are very much commentary on the music business.
Yeah, that's true. That is
Well,
true.
I like those aspects. I think the lyrics are great and I think the concepts are great. But it does have that mood of Dark Side of the Moon.
It does indeed, yeah.
It carries on with a bit of that mood.
Yep.
Which is part of what makes it great. Again, Richard Wright's keyboard playing was unbelievable and really sets the tone of the whole album.
My number 3 is Dark Side of the Moon, released in 1973.
Blasphemous.
Dark Side of the Moon, I often criticize it for being overrated, and while I still maintain that, it does have some of the songs that, because for the most part, the reason why I maintain that it is overrated is because of the overplayed songs like Money. But I do think that the concept and the music out of here is out of this world good. Production for the time is great. Alan Parsons is a legend. Wonderful. Please give this album a listen. The standout tracks: Breathe in the Air, On the Run, Time, Us and Them, Brain Damage, Eclipse. I can go on and on and on about this album. It's very good. I just don't know if it's the best. So let's move on to number two.
And number two, I had Animals.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the early infusion of Roger Waters' political point of view, he did an okay job because this album is a little bit more, I wouldn't want to say objective, but it's more of an observational.
Yeah.
These are the types of folks that you deal with, and we can categorize them into these categories.
Yeah.
And they're not inaccurate descriptions of the type of people that you meet as you go through life.
No.
They actually are very good descriptions. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
appreciate, this is a continuation of Roger Waters' lyrical description of the world around him and how
Yep.
he sees things.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, surrounded by some classic songwriting and Richard Wright keyboard playing and David Gilmour's incredible guitar playing, and it just comes together to me in a very, very good Pink Floyd album that
Mm-hmm.
it's an iconic album that captures their sound of the mid 70s perfectly.
Yeah.
And for me it's the second best album.
My number two is Metal, released in 1971. This was extremely tough for me because, again, I think that this is an album that could probably be number one at any given day. However, right now I'm saying it's second best. Not because there is anything particularly wrong with it. It contains what I consider to be some of Floyd's best and most beautiful songs in their entire discography. Um, the production for the time is also well done. Plus, it's been remastered very well in recent years. The atmosphere here, unbelievable. And I don't think they ever managed to get this specific atmosphere back. And I'm, at least not to this degree. And maybe that's a good thing. It's home to one of the most iconic Pink Floyd songs in history. I'm not complaining. Standout tracks for me are One of These Days, which we've seen live a good few times. It's fantastic. Great cinematics there. A Pillow of Winds, which is easily one of the most beautiful Pink Floyd songs ever written. Fearless, which is very atmospheric, very good. Saint-Tropez, very good. I enjoy it. And Echoes, which is just so unbelievably iconic. And why not we move on to number one?
I know it's going to be very boring, but I'm going to say that the best Pink Floyd album easily is The Dark Side of the Moon. Of course, there is no Dark Side of the Moon, so it probably should have been called The Far Side of the Moon, but still,
Yeah.
I think it, if it's not meant as, a play on words or whatever, the dark side, it also talks about the dark side of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of sort of depressing type songs about, Roger Waters' view on existence and other people that he sees in his everyday life, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Still, it is. I think it's become an iconic album because it creates every song has the mood of that conveys the lyrics, and I think that's what really makes it stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And the lyrics are essential and they're relatable to anybody anywhere on earth.
Yeah.
because they all have the same experiences. For example, I know you said you didn't like the song "Money," but
I like it.
it
It's just
is
overplayed.
a universal theme, right?
Yeah, it is. It's just, I think it's been overplayed a little bit. Pretty much the only complaint I have about that song.
Time as well as a universal concept. The
Yep.
idea that life is racing by and you can't keep up,
Mm-hmm.
and you know you're getting old too fast. I can relate to those themes, particularly now, but
Mm.
one day you will be able to relate to those themes as well. Uh, but I do think that this is it's you know we all think that maybe we all hope that if we stick at something long enough, after 15, 20 years, we'll eventually get to the best thing. And Pink Floyd got to the best thing very early on.
Yeah.
I know it took them, it is about, as I said, 10, 15 years. They didn't get, this is not their first album, so I don't know what it is, like their 10th album or something. I don't know, but it took them a while to get to this, but this is where they really took all of the ideas that they were doing on those preceding 10 albums and they put it all together into an absolute classic. And I don't uh, want to underestimate the input and assistance of Alan Parsons. I think he was instrumental in making this album sound the way that the lyrics were, the mood that the lyrics set.
Yeah.
And on top of that, of course, I will always put in, whenever I can, a a shout out from the great keyboard playing of Richard Wright.
Yeah.
I mean, he really does set the mood, and you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's iconic. And this is a classic prog rock album,
Yeah.
though much of the rest of their catalog is not really prog rock. This one definitely is in the prog rock category, and
Yep.
it is one of the great albums ever, and one of the great prog rock albums ever. One of the great albums ever, but by I mean one of the great albums of any genre. It's just a great rock album,
Yep.
but it's one of the great prog rock albums as well.
Mhm.
And so it's very easy for me, I think, to say that it's Pink Floyd's best. No problem. And I think I'll leave it at that.
My number one, we all know, is Animals from 1977. This is probably my favorite album ever made. It's probably my favorite album ever. It has, in my opinion, probably one of the best album structures of the 70s, if not of all time. Um, the opening and closing with 1 minute tracks, which are themes for this album, plus the three epics in between. I think that this is easily the album where Richard Wright and David Gilmour shined brightest. It's probably their best open to close album ever recorded. I still don't adore a little bit of the politics here, but I do agree with you that the observation of the classes in this album is very interesting, and I can overlook that because of how unbelievable the music and the songwriting, production, sounds on this album are. Um, it's just so well done. It's brilliant. The standout tracks are every single track. Pigs on the Wing, dogs, sheep, and pigs. Three different ones. What a wonderful album Animals is. I genuinely think if you're looking for an album that is perfect from front to back, it is Animals. And I think we'll leave it there. Dad, what do you think? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the risk of repeating myself. Pink Floyd is simply not one of the great progressive rock bands, but they're a great band for what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I would categorize it more as psychedelic rock for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But when they stray off into art rock, progressive rock, which they did on Dark Side of the Moon, they become a classic band and one of the greatest bands ever.
Mm-hmm.
But for the prog rock fan, particularly people who are not familiar with all of the bands out there, this is not a great discography overall.
Mm-hmm.
They don't display any of the musical uh, sophistry that many of the other great prog rock bands like Emerson, Lake and Palmer do.
Right.
So they're not really a great prog rock band, although they are a great psychedelic rock band.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're good, they're one of the best.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of their discography is noodling here and there and not really knowing where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
They don't stick to a song. They sort of make a lot of noise, and but again, when they were great, like on Dark Side of the Moon, they're definitely those albums are definitely deserving of being in the Prog Archive's top 100 greatest prog rock albums of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Although it doesn't seem like that's what they were trying to do, but I'm not really sure what they were trying to do. But despite the fact that I'm not a huge fan, I can see the greatness of some of the better albums.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Maybe I'll go back in a few years and give these albums another go round and see if I've changed my mind.
Yeah.
It was fun having a countdown.
Yeah. I think that it's worth doing these, seeing how the album, how you feel about one album is, and compared to another one, for example, the Final Cut versus Animals. It's very funny that the Final Cut is only 6 years after Animals, and it's the worst one for me. It's funny to see how quickly they went from their best to their worst. It's hilarious. It's very strange to me too, but I like this breakdown, and I think that for what Pink Floyd is, the good material that you can find on these albums is top notch, and the best albums that exist are absolutely fantastic and are peak prog rock, peak historic music in general, and just people should be listening to some of these albums because they're absolute classics. Now, I will leave it at that. Very much for watching. As always, if you enjoyed this, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all very much for watching. And peace.